Okay, this may not be the final video. It may take me 2 videos to get over all the material on poetry, but it is certainly my attempt to make this the last of the videos for Snow Day, January 16th. Put this on pause and get your poetry booklet. Thank you. The poetry booklet, ta-da! And what we're going to do right now is we're going to go over the definitions that were in the homework that I gave you to look at the video and the PowerPoint, the list of terms that I put under topic 7. A lot of them you are familiar with already. In just talking on Monday night, Jasper said, "I love the metaphor in this middle section." I'm going, yes, he used the word right. You know metaphor and simile. I'm sure you also know personification and other terms like imagery. You can pretty much tell from or think you know. But these are important terms in discussing poetry. And not only do you have to discuss it now, a huge section of the AP Literature exam is poetry. Not only do they have poetry in the multiple choice section, but they always will give you a poem to analyze in the essay section. In AP Language and Composition, that's basically nonfiction, and we don't have poetry so often there. But sometimes we do get it if it's a historic poem and you have to do a historical analysis. So, in other words, don't blow this off as a short-term memory thing. These terms are important. You can use them now through college. Your book says, the brick, there are 4 types of poetry, and they mean lyric, narrative, dramatic, and didactic, which is teaching poetry. Since virtually no one writes or uses didactic poetry anymore, and there is a type of tone poetry called satiric, I have made the 4th category called ironic. That covers short poems like lyrics that have a harsh or tongue-in-cheek or nasty tone. Lyric poems are poems that reflect the thoughts and feelings of one person. Now, the person doesn't have to be a human. If you look at the poem, The Birch Canoe, that is about a canoe speaking to you, and the canoe is the person in the poem. And it's the canoe's thoughts and feelings, so that is a lyric. Other lyric poems you'll find on page 9 in your book. That's what I've got sitting out here on the desktop. These are both lyric poems, and they are both rhymed. A rhyme is not necessary for a lyric poem, but you'll find most of the older ones do rhyme. This is a sonnet. It is not a Shakespearean sonnet. It has a different rhyme scheme. This is the Petrarchian or Italian format for a sonnet. Sonnet has 10 beats per line and 14 lines long. It's pretty much a square. This one is a very simple thing. Actually, you might have heard it sung. It's been set to music, but it was written as a lyrical poem, not a song. The opposite of lyrics are the ironics. They're about the same length, but they have a different tone altogether, where a lyric can be joyful, sad, elegiac, humorous, reflective, and exuberant. All of the harsher emotions are in the ironic poems. And the ironic poems include things that you mentioned you liked, like We Real Cool and Ozymandias. And my favorite, The Death of the Ball-Turret Gunner. Actually, I love both of these. This one is actually based on a real experience. There is a broken down statue in the desert in the Middle East with these words on it. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Now that's irony. And we've talked about the Death of the Ball-Turret Gunner. The other two forms of poems are longer. And let's see if I can find them. Narrative poems. And here's the difference between narrative and the next form, which is dramatic. Narrative poems must tell a story. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And they generally are told by a narrator who will frequently quote the people in it with a he said and she said. They are always in past tense because it happened. Okay. The sample I give, they're a little longer to get all of that in, and they can or do not have to rhyme. This one is a famous one by Robert Frost, and it's about a boy who was a hardworking farm kid, and he got his hand caught in a buzzsaw, and it got cut off. And he purposely allowed himself to die when they tried to reattach it, because he knew he would not be good for any work on the farm if he didn't have his right hand. It's very sad, but it is a story. That makes it narrative. The opposing side of narrative is a dramatic poem. And here's the difference. A dramatic poem is almost, in fact, I think it is always, in present tense. And it doesn't sound or look like writing. It sounds and looks like talking, like words said on a stage. Usually one person, and they are addressing another person. Like this one. There go my heart's abhorrence. Water your flower pots do. If hate had killed man, brother Lawrence, God's blood would not mine kill you. Wow. Here are two monks living in a monastery, and one is benevolent and kind, and the other guy can't stand his guts. So this is the Soliloquy of the Spanish Cloister by Robert Browning. Robert Barrett Browning wrote a lot of narrative and dramatic poems. This is quite long. I'm not going to go into it, but you'll notice it is in present tense, and it sounds like people talking. In your booklet, there are not many samples of dramatic poems, and some can be argued about. For instance, there is a lyric that a lot of people think is actually a dramatic poem. And can't find it right now. See if you can find it. If you find one that has curtains in it. Okay. Other terms you really must know include as you can see, I'm looking at my notes here. When we talk about imagery in poems, this is not just description. Description would be a line like, the moon shone bright upon the snow. Yeah, we can picture that. We can picture the moon shining on the snow. But there's nothing elegant or imaginative about that description. That's just straightforward factual. A description, a description that is full of imagery would be, the moon is a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. Now that's an unusual one. One of the poems that you guys picked was The Eagle. And that is purely full of imagery, short as it is. Let's see. Eagle is on page 4. He clasps the crag with crooked hands. Okay, so what are hands to an eagle? Well, those are its talons. But talons is a factual word. Crooked hands is far greater an image. And clasping the crag, the cliff where it is sitting, that clasp goes along with the word hands. So that's a very, very strong image. Close to the sun in lonely lands, ringed by the azure world, he stands. Well, what is ringed by the azure world? That means you can see him against the sky. And it doesn't just say the brilliant blue sky. The azure, that's a phenomenal word for blue. And to be talked about ringed by the azure lands, that's really wonderful. By saying the sea is wrinkled, we get an idea of the distance between the eagle and the sea down below him. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. He watches from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt, he falls. He's obviously not falling. He is pitching himself headfirst into the ocean to catch fish. But it is a beautiful picture in the mind. Like a thunderbolt, he falls. Okie dokie. That's imagery. Otherwise, it's just description. I'm losing my voice. So your assignment was to decide what type the 3 poems were that you liked. And I want you to go through and see if you can figure them out for at least the first page of the table of contents in the booklet. Everything from Annabel Lee to My Papa's Waltz. And that's, it's not quite 15 minutes yet. I have a little bit more time. I want to talk about My Papa's Waltz because I've been using the word tone, and that means the emotion, the mood that the poet puts into the piece of writing. My Papa's Waltz is a very unusual poem because it has 2 different tones, and the tone of it depends on your experience and your imagination. It's on page 14, if you'll turn to that, please. This was written by a Michigan author, world-renowned Michigan poet, who grew up in the Saginaw area, and he grew up the son of farmers who had greenhouses. And his father was a very harsh disciplinarian, and he was also a drinking man. So I'm going to read this poem to you twice, and I want you to hear the difference in the inflection depending on your interpretation. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard with dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. So that way we've got a picture of a loving, if hard, father dancing around the kitchen with his little boy. Now picture it this way. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy.